very interesting panel, how to ensure patient safety remains in the industry priority. Maybe some of the panelists would like to introduce this topic with some general considerations, and I'll just ask you to take the microphone. So I don't know, Dr. Richardson, do you have general considerations you would like to share to introduce the conversation? And then we'll be open to all your questions or comments or discussions on the topic.
Thanks very much, Veronique. I'm Michael Richardson. Veronique, thanks very much for the kind introduction. Just a few thoughts which could maybe kick it off. As we've all heard from Peter Arlett, the biggest paradigm shift in legislation for the last 2 decades. So how do we ensure that patient safety, which has been forced into the foreground, remains there? How do we do it internally and externally? I think those who don't have it already integrated into their cross-functionally in the company should get there. Those that do, we have to keep it there because it's not going to change. The position is not going to change. The way we do it will change because we'll have to integrate with other functions more and more as we go forward. Some thoughts around it. I think culture is important. I know certainly myself and a number of my colleagues bringing the legislation and the ability to do it and bringing pharmacovigilance from the background into the foreground has taken a cultural change. It used to be something that sat in the back room, prepared an aggregate report now and again, and then if there were questions about it, then regulatory and clinical would take over. That isn't the case anymore. And the company needs to ensure that this gets a cross-functional cultural approach to benefit and risk. This needs to be integrated both into development and then into the life cycle management of the products. Putting the patient first, I think, is a mantra, but really acting it is very important. It goes right back to the grandfather of medicine that first do no harm. And I think risk management and knowing which patient is going to benefit from your drug goes right back to doing no harm first. And then I think some things of how we keep this cultural level and how we ensure that benefit risk remains integrated. There are 2 areas. One, we need to engage and collaborate broadly. We need to work with the legislators and the healthcare providers and patient groups. We need to ensure that the legislation is implementable and talks to patient safety, not just compliance. We need to ensure that we know what the patients want and what benefits them, and Debashis mentioned personalized medicine comes more into it. Not only know how to prevent harm, but also to know which patients will benefit from the medicine already takes out of the equation those that are going to get no benefit, so the benefit-risk paradigm changes dramatically already. And then underpinning it all, operational excellence at a number of levels that incorporates compliance, first of all, make sure that that at all levels is maintained. We need to make sure that drug safety is global and harmonized. Medicines have a single outcome for each of its indications, and they don't change dramatically across countries, across nations, across populations. There are local applications and there are exceptions on certain enzyme changes in different groups, and those we need to understand. But in essence, there needs to be a single understanding that a medicine does something, and we need to make sure that everyone understands that singly. And then within the companies, cross-functional working, both commercial, medical, marketing, and PV, clinical needs to be put in place.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks, Michael. I think that's a good place to start. You touch on, and I think what you touch on is an extension of what Mr. Ghosh also reflected on in his presentation, an excellent presentation. I speak from an affiliate perspective during this panel discussion and this information sharing section. And I generally reflect on a daily basis from the beginning in. Does my team know why they are turning up for work on a daily basis? Do they have passion for what they're doing? And unless they have passion for what they're doing, it's unlikely that we will be able to influence the key stakeholders that you mentioned and you referred to. So for me, I start with some housekeeping initiatives. Drive the passion internally before we look at influencing others externally. So that's, for me, is a key aspect. And we don't have to look too far to understand why we're doing pharmacovigilance, which is, as you know, much broader than perhaps the reference to drug safety. If we look at the basic definition for drug safety pharmacovigilance, it's about understanding what has happened and protecting patients, preventing that harm from reoccurring. So we have a clear rationale for making sure that what we do stays, and you touch on it, stays not in the back room, but is now seen as a front room entity. And that gives me an example that many years ago, if I ever came across my general manager in the corridor in the lift, and he would say, "John, I haven't seen you for a while," my automatic reference, say 5 years ago, was, "General manager, you probably don't want to see me too often, because if you do, that is not good news for the company." For me now, that has been done. We've done a 360 degree. If you're not seeing your general manager or your leadership teams or your key opinion leaders within the company often enough, then you're not doing what you should be doing. You need to be up there. You need to be very visible now in order to influence the key stakeholders in the business. So for me, the passion should start with all of us as key stakeholders within the industry of pharmacovigilance. There are other aspects that I do in the company that I'll share that in with as we go through the session. I'm sure if anyone else wants to.
Is there any other? Otherwise, we can ask questions. If there's anyone has a question in the audience, I think that can be. Is there anyone there? No. Well, I actually have a question about this topic of patient safety and industry priority in the frame of the new legislation, which is taking a lot of energy, efforts, and resources. Do you have the feeling that maybe all these resources we had to put together to change our processes, to train our people, etc., may have shifted the focus a little bit too much on quality assurance and systems and all that, rather than looking at medical patient safety on a daily basis, maybe at least for the last 12 months or 15 months?
I'd like to answer this, Vernick, because only 2 weeks ago we had a meeting in the company working for UCB, not UBC, but UCB. And we were looking back, reflecting on the 12 months post-July 2012. And people were saying it's remarkable what we have achieved within the company to have discussions about our products, about benefit risk. And there was never anybody saying, well, this has cost us a lot of money, or this has been a drain on resources, or this has required new systems to be implemented. This was all about collaboration and about benefit risk, which is taking safety out of the shadows and start leading the discussions about benefit risk. Not only benefit risk at the time of marketing authorization application or renewal, but on an ongoing basis. So this whole GVP, all the changes, yes, it has costed a lot of money, and I think probably double digits increases in budgets for pharmacovigilance, but the real benefit that it brought to us being the patient, the physicians, and the companies is collaboration that allows for decision making. So technology is important, the integration of technology is important, but it is the interactions between the different teams. And once you see starting people moving from medical affairs or from clinical development into drug safety or pharmacovigilance, I think that's an illustration of the increased collaboration that is critical in order to keep safety as a priority in the industry.
Amer?
I would like to just add a comment on that, or maybe even start by pressing the button first.
It's working.
Okay, well, I'm normally loud enough, I don't even need a microphone. Pharmacovigilance, when I started many years ago, I don't want to show my age here, before Volume 9, before even like Chapter 5, We used to be at that stage, and long after, the bringers of bad news. As one of my colleagues mentioned, if you see me too many times in the corridor, or if I come too many times to your office, it means it's bad news. Has it moved on to improve patient safety? I mean, this is basically the big question for me. As Veronique said, the administrative part, the huge task now, the biggest legislation in Europe for the last 20 years, putting a huge burden on all of us, especially from quality perspective. Does it really add anything? This is a question for both us, the industry, and the regulators. Maybe I've been lucky enough that I worked once for the regulator as well as the industry. So maybe wearing the two hats, I could see both perspectives. But to my unsatisfaction, it has not reached that point. There is once somebody said there is no such thing as safe medicines, because all medicines are not supposed to be safe. In fact, that's why we symbolize them with the poison of the snake. Aspirin can make you bleed a little bit from your stomach every time you take it, whichever route of administration actually. And you could buy aspirin from a grocery shop, at least in the UK. So there are no such thing as safe medicines, but there are such things as safe doctors. The number of times we have seen even products being withdrawn from the market because they've been badly prescribed. I think more education to the physicians is still needed, and more effective systems are still needed. How many of you do actually believe that updating one line in the SPC is going to change the habit of a physician not to use that drug in that particular patient population? Do they actually read that update? I think this is basically where we get in. Are we really helping the patients here? And what are the methods we should be thinking about to truly and genuinely protect the patients? And there are many aspects one could consider. One could consider the method of communication, the obligations to physicians, to prescribers, a bit more investment in personalized medicine and pharmacogenetics, which, do we know how many companies are interested in it? I know that Glaxo Wellcome did have an initiative sometime because they had a bit of money to spare. But which company is even interested in spending that much money in pharmacogenetics to know that, okay, we have subpopulation we shall not prescribe it to, and in fact we could even save the drug. Forget about saving the patient here. Even save the drug by not giving it to certain population of patients, because as we know, when I used to be in the MHRA, 3 cases of very severe reaction would mean that we really hammer that database. We hammer the sponsors and the MAH to ask them to produce about 2 tons of paper analyzing what happened in these 3 cases. But all of it, is it really science? Is it actual science? I mean, we're stepping away from all the basics of science we learned at school, statistics and others. So this is basically my comment. I just want to make comment.
If I can add to that, an extension of that, I think you asked a key question, which it would be useful for those in the audience to also contribute. You know, do we think when we send a Dear Healthcare Communication or Direct Healthcare Professional Communication letter that we are really changing attitudes, changing behaviors? Are the HCPs really reading that information? And that's a question I'd like you to answer. But more importantly, if we have passion for what we do, are we doing anything as an industry or as a function to change that? Or are we just asking the questions and then just complying with current requirements for the regulation? CHMP says this must be done, EMA says this must be done. We get the draft letters, we change it based on our national competent authorities, and we send it out without thinking. Is there anything we can do to change that? Because if we are thinking of patients, which is where we should be going, and we're thinking about commercial value, saving companies money, shareholders value, then we need to be challenging current thinking. And that's where at affiliate level, I constantly encourage my team, let's make a paradigm shift if we can. Let's contribute to patient safety by doing things rather than just paying lip service to pharmacovigilance. We need also to make sure that our commercial colleagues see what we're doing not as a regulatory requirement and or an administrative burden, but we're adding value to the commercial processes within the company. So just to answer that question and throw it out to the wider group, are we as a function doing anything to make a change, and therefore profiling our function, pharmacovigilance, to a wider audience?
Okay, I think there's a question in the audience right now.
Hello, Lisa Chamberlain-James from Trilogy Writing. Just a comment on what you've just said, John. We already know that at least 10% of all ADRs are caused by people taking the medicines incorrectly. Now, what we don't know really is whether that's because people don't understand how to take their medicines, or whether because the GPs are not looking at the updates and whether they're not informing the patients correctly, or whether they themselves don't understand that there are changes to the SPC and PI. Now, I'm not trying to start a conversation about patient information, because I know we've got a big session on that tomorrow, but I'm wondering if the panel has a view on where they think the main problem is, or is it an even split, that we need to address both patient information and healthcare professionals that are just not engaged anymore?
I'll have a stab at you're talking about the medication error. Industry play a role in medication error, which is around the education and risk management. There was an EMA conference not long ago, a 2-day conference, and it's quite evident that as big as the problem is, it's also spans multiple groups of stakeholders, from patients themselves, the information, the packaging, the labeling, the practice and training within the healthcare system, both doctors, nurses, administrators, pharmacists, people who are doing the education, the language going into the pool, etc. So it is a problem that has to be tackled. Industry play our role, and our role is really to work with designers on packaging, risk management, and education on our drug, that it gets used by the right patients in the right way. But it's a very broad topic, medication error.
I think it's just beyond that. I think your question is that, and also your question is basically, have we closed the gap? Have we closed the gap? What is the roles that we are not playing? I mean, it is to me rather surprising, with all the technologies that we have achieved, that I'm not proposing even in a system here, but with all the technologies that we have achieved, that there is no such thing that when the doctor prescribes something, that something will pop up and to say, be aware there's been an update. As simple as that. Or a bit more, instead of regulators just giving us yet again a new regulation, which means that we have to work 40 hours a day in pharmacovigilance, maybe one little item to impose something on the prescribers, and to remind them of their obligation, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who are authorized to kill, aren't they? So the balance is not shifted in the right direction, unfortunately. More administration is being added. Does it add value? I'm not disagreeing with the administrations being added. In fact, I will be contradicting myself, because my presentation later today will show at least the benefits of the good side of the new legislation. But saying that, have we closed the gap really for the patient's sake, for something practical? I'm not sure that we have, and it is sadly so.
Okay. May I ask the panelists, Rebecca Wang from Amgen, I think it would be another important topic to talk about effectiveness of the measures to ensure patient safety, because a large part of it has to do done with medical education. We have to really bring drug safety into the curriculum of medical school. But regarding the topic we are discussing today, how to ensure patient safety remains the industry priority, I would like to raise a an idea that is quite different from the conventional thinking, because drug safety really drains the resources from the company. We do our work and people are passionate, but the resource requirement is huge. So what the company sees is that they don't get any material benefit. So may we propose that this is really like the good driver's record, that if a company really is really doing actively on patient safety and the inspection shows that the company is compliant, is there really like a credit that can be given to the company, like a good driver can get really insurance credit because of good driving record? So this is a provocative thinking, and whether industry can take it to the regulatory agencies, that really the company has spent adequate resources and also have training records and have been proactive in really raising safety concerns and proposing risk management, and the AE reporting has shown that it is effective. Would really the company be credited like a tax credit, or really so in a way the company sees that drug safety is bringing tangible benefit. So we are no longer passive.
If I may try to answer this, I think there's no single company who would not be happy to receive the opposite of a 483 with a letter attached and publicized. But it's probably not your question. Is there a KPI in a company that can help the function safety to show the value that is being created? I think that the KPIs that we all have to have for the PSMF and the consequences that would happen if these KPIs would go down and would be seen, observed by inspectors. That's what we use in the company to make sure that we get in the company the resources we need, because the consequences of not only not being compliant but not being able to do what is required to do in the legislation, for instance a continuous benefit risk assessment, the consequences of that are pretty clear. We measure it if we don't get to our objectives, and that's the way we get our resources.
I'd like to add on to that the MHRA have in principle the thought that they want to move to a risk-based assessment, and they tried to get the principles right, and I think we should engage with the regulators to continue along that if they're comfortable with you, you go on a longer schedule. If they're not, they will come in more frequently. So that principle I think we all buy into. How we implement it is very difficult. I think the other side on the addressing, everybody says there's resources and we have to add resources, which we've had to deal with the new legislation. The strong point around the new legislation, it brought benefit risk together, which allowed the company to put pharmacovigilance up front. It gained the attention of the industry because certainly in Europe, it became the single document that determines your marketing status now is an appropriate evaluation on a benefit risk basis. We have to add resources, and most of us have to then make a choice as a company where that's going to come from rather than just add. So we can see, because benefit risk has come into it, we need to see where we can prevent duplication of effort. There's so much collection of data by industry now on the risk side and the PIVA side and all available data that we see emerging now of access and health economics and the medical groups in the market, and how we drive this forward, working with academia to get the right methodologies in place that you could utilize this data in more than one way. We have to collect it and utilize it properly for compliance. That's a given, so we're going to have to do it. Some of it can be outsourced, some not. But there are ways that we can pull HEOR and medical group into the risk management and effectiveness measurement and use that data in a more useful way, both for the patients as well as resource sparing for the companies.
Thanks, Michael. Just to add, I think your questions, your controversial questions are valid to be raised in this forum. I would counter that by saying we do get acknowledgement as industry, as PV functions, that we are doing a good job. And that's based on an audit feedback and inspection feedback, where you are told by, well, it's your local competent authority, you have a fit for purpose PV function. But that should be the benchmark. That should be the starting point. How you choose to use that information is down to yourself. You can then use that to say, look, general manager, look, business strategist, we need to incorporate this good safety base that we have in the company into our commercial strategy. If you think safety is expensive, then try a lawsuit when you're not managing your safety effectively. So we need to turn that around and sell the benefits of what we're doing. It's not traditionally what we've done in the past. I mean, when we look at the aeronautical industry or the automotive industry, the nuclear industry, they no longer need to sell their safety, and they are fairly high-risk industries. When you jump on an aircraft on a daily basis, very few of us, excluding myself, we think of the safety of flying thousands of miles in the air. Aeronautical industry is about luxury and travel and the benefits of first class and upper class. And below that is the safety. Those planes would not be up in the air if they were not safe. And the commercial success of those industries are based on good safety practices. We need to incorporate and sell that to our commercial strategies to sell the benefit and to maintain the profile of the industry.
I think we all recognize that, but really, would it be possible, like for pharma or EPI, to approach regulatory agencies so that regulatory agencies will really recognize companies that really do a very good job, and then at least in a way then, because nowadays really regulatory agencies are using sticks only to enhance pharmacovigilance. So why can't we approach regulatory agencies that many of us are doing a very good job and the company has a clean record? So in that case, would the company be recognized and get some recognition from the regulatory agencies? So we are using both carrot and sticks to really...
It's a very good point.
Yes.
The thing is that they will never give you that. The reason being, and I'm wearing their hat now. The reason being is that you are placing a product on the market. You have to have a due diligence of its safety. So that's the thinking behind it. That's why. But what is a pity, which I totally agree with you, what is a pity is that when they see a marvelous model, they will not, unfortunately, whether it's because they are civil servants or not, I'm not quite sure, they will not say to the rest of the industry, we have seen a marvelous model, look at that. But you know what? Look at GCP and look at GVP. Do you think it was invented only by the regulators? Oh God, no, it was invented by both, mostly the industry actually. They come and see what we do, and then they go and implement it as law for the rest of us. And this is what's been going on for the last 25 years. So are they going to acknowledge it? Most probably not. But what would be good, and this is an excellent proposal, is to actually ask them that if they see something good out there, because they are the butterflies and they go and inspect everywhere, is to come and share it with us and say, well, this is the way to do it. They are doing it through legislations and guidelines, but sometimes it is nice to be acknowledged by saying Pfizer did this, or J&J did this, or Maxerona did this, or Amgen did it.
As I sit here and I think I hear the conversations, and many years back in a different industry context and different, we used to have a similar conversation, saying organization which is responsible for quality undergoes audit from an external organization. How do you, first of all, and they're different, you can talk about 5 different legislations and 5 different countries. How do you have a function without too much overhead? How do you structure it? And second, how do you get resources internally from the business? It's an outside-in view from a different context, and That point of time when we were talking about it, everybody thought it was a very ridiculous idea. So I'm quite sure you will also think it's not a very feasible idea. We said, forget about legislations. I think all of you talked about patient safety is the priority, right? And if you have molecule, you are focusing on patient safety, what are the 10 things we have to do anyway? And take each of those sub-functions and really develop them. That point of time we used Six Sigma technique to a maturity where you can really feel comfortable, measure, and you can show outcomes. And then we went and said, let's now look at all different laws and regulations and quality processes and see how do you take all of these sub-functions and put it in particular order and give the results in a particular format to satisfy the external agency which is auditing you. And our target, at that point of time, we had set a target which I am quite sure will not happen for pharmaceutical industry. For a particular audit, we'll spend very little time. Majority of the functions should not be spending time audit because you already have information and certain level of. That was our target. And that point of time in that industry, it looked very difficult, but we achieved it to about, I can say 95% level. Question is, can you step back, look at it that way, rather than, talking regulators, and it will be there. I mean, regulators are putting pressure, saying if patient safety is first, what are the 10 things we have to do? It's an outside-in view, and I have done it, I have been part of doing it in a very different industry at a different point of time. Second is, same question, how do you really get resourcing and budgeting? So we said, what are the 10, at the end of the day, business is a business. Shareholder is not going to buy your share. If you every time you do a little bit more profit, EPS, your stock prices go up, and your CEO has to look at that. Question is, how do you correlate and quantify how does it contribute to the business? Again, it's probably one of the most difficult topics, but we did, right? And it first cut really came up, everybody laughed at it. Second cut, people say, wow, looks like something is there. And third and fourth cut, actually people started appreciating it. So question is, can drug safety functions do or look at things that way? It's not easy because it's like you are on a raceway and going at whatever, 200 miles speed, and you have to change the tires. Right? So drug safety function cannot sit quietly even for a day because you have molecule. At the same time, you have to think of how to change your organization and functions. And that's, I think, one of the ways to look at it. I think it's still far away to go, but only when you are able to do it, all of a sudden you are a notch up. Instead of being afraid of, whatever, audits, we used to look forward to audits. Because auditor will come in and say, wow, you have looked at it completely differently. Can you do that? It's a very aspirational thought, but if you can start looking at it and at least implement it in one function and start maturing it and so on and so forth, maybe that's what 20 years down the line, you will not be so much talking about regulators and budget. Rather than other people will come to you and say, here is the budget because you do contribute to the business tremendously, which you do, which probably doesn't get measured today as much as you are saying, and so on. So that's a very outside-in thought, but as I keep hearing these topics, it just takes me back about 10, 12 years, and we used to have very similar, but of course your context is much broader, much more, I think it has much more implications, but I think basic thoughts apply.
Okay. Sorry, I think there's a question from the back of the room.
It's not as much a question as a comment. When the MHRA were looking at the risk-based inspection program and the presenting of findings, it was deemed that they could publish reports on the website, but they couldn't only publish the bad ones in terms of name and shame, or publish the good ones. So when the consultation was held, it was an all or nothing approach, and it was deemed that nobody wanted to be on the bad list, and as such weren't willing to put themselves on the good list if that's the place they were. So that was thought about, say, about 5 years ago when this was under discussion. The other element of it in terms of, say, the inspector's perspective and credits, it's kind of like a restaurant. You don't get credits for not having a rat. If you do have rats, you get into trouble and you get shut down. And it is very much, it's a cost of doing business. Yes, you can continue to do business, as opposed to the financial elements of personal insurance. The comment about not getting positives, you may not get those positives, say, directly to yourself, but on occasion at inspection, good practice will be mentioned to other companies. You might want to speak to company X about this topic because what they're doing is perhaps something that would help you. But it's one of these things, you don't personally see that because it's at somebody else's inspection.
Thank you. Very, very useful comments, I think, to this one.
Yeah, and I know you speak from a position of strength, so because you're a key player in the risk-based process. Just to add to what Mr. Ghosh was saying too, I think, and we've started it by this discussion. We clearly understand the past. We're starting to challenge current paradigms. And unless we do so, we are not going to maintain the visibility of pharmacovigilance in the industry. We have to look at capacity planning, and I agree with you fully. If we assume the new legislation comes on board and that means more resources for PV, we are not challenging current paradigms. We need to look, is there anything we're doing that we don't need to do and therefore free up capacity and therefore sell that message to our stakeholders that, we don't necessarily need more people. It's controversial. We don't necessarily need more people because we have freed up capacity and we are therefore adding value to the business. We're not adding value in terms of safety, but we're adding value in terms of not requesting to spend more money. So we can add value in that way. I'll give you a simple scenario, how we can put additional unnecessary pressure on ourselves. We recently had an internal audit, and one of the things most of you who are in day-to-day PV would realize, you keep a log of your current organization. So on a monthly basis, we would print out our current organogram, put it in a file so we have a manual record. It can be electronic or paper. And an auditor saw that, and they said, do you guys actually sign this printout of your current organogram every month? And we said, no, we just keep a monthly record. And that is now an additional requirement. So we now not only have to keep our organogram, but we have to sign and date it. And for me, that is wasted effort. We have better things, and you've touched on it there. We have better things to do rather than satisfying a need which is not documented anywhere that we have to do. So it's challenging those paradigms, and we have to make sure we're not internally putting unnecessary pressure on us, and that's using up valuable resources, which could be spent on, as you said, scientific assessment, looking at technologies and how we can build capacity.
Okay.
Don't know if anyone in the audience has had similar challenges.
Yeah, with one of the last questions, maybe we could come to the end and we'll conclude.
To continue on that, we get the same challenge from our management. You guys in safety seem to be trying to do everything. Can you give me an example of a major safety-related activity that you've been able to successfully drop without negative consequences for either the company or from the regulatory agencies?
I can think of a paradigm or of a challenge that I've recently put out there, and I put it out directly to the UK regulator. We got a remit recently to say we need to send out the direct healthcare communication to a specific target audience. And that target audience accounted to be, I think, almost 100,000 HCPs in the UK, of which part of the requirement was to send them an updated SPC. And we had, I think, 4 SPCs for that specific product, which meant the standard letter and 4 copies of an SPC to each of the healthcare professionals. And I looked at this and said, if I was an healthcare professional working out there, I can promise you I wouldn't be looking at 4 SPCs. And I wasn't comfortable with that being sent out by the company. One, as you know, it's very costly to send out 100,000 healthcare professional letters, so potentially some cost saving. to the administration behind putting that all together. And I proposed a scenario to the MHR which was accepted, and we are currently now testing that we can possibly go down the electronic route. Unfortunately, it provided some work for us because we now have to feed back to the MHR the result of that pilot. But hopefully if that works, and there's no reason why it wouldn't work, we're looking at an electronic distribution route. If that works, it would be a benefit for a large range of companies, and significant for us, moving from a cost of something like £138,000 to send us out. The cost to us today would be about £40,000. So there is some cost, significant cost saving, but ultimately we are thinking about the end user. As you mentioned, Amer, is this likely to change behavior if we adopt a different approach? Importantly linked to that, we can also measure the potential uptake of that distribution. We can measure the click rate into the SPCs, and hopefully there's some beneficial outcomes which we don't yet know, but that's an example I can share with you.
Another example on where safety have dropped something, or we've taken duplication out, so all incoming cases used to come into safety and some went into MedInfo. Everything comes into medical information. It gets triaged straight up to the headquarters for, or if it's outsourced single case processing, it bypasses the local market. They will get copied in because they can access it through the global database. Saved up to 15% of local headcount, which we haven't been able to give back because we had to put it onto risk management implementation. But without that, it would have been an increase. So we've been able to keep resource flat by changing a process in a company which actually is now more efficient because we have now a global medical information group that work with all the local markets.
If I can add another example, when I started my career in drug safety, discovered that we have literally hundreds of adverse events in our portfolio that required special monitoring. And if you start digging there, you very often see that this was a question by a regulator, which then is carried forward for years and years, where many people produce text and then come to the conclusion, well, there's nothing. If you have to do year after year an analysis of dry mouth, the impact on the public health not being quite clear, I think it's on us to go back to the regulator and challenge and close these events for special monitoring, whatever they are. And I think that the current system with the PBRER, the transparency, makes it possible, and we've been successful in closing many of these. We still have many to go, and we sometimes get surprises, disagreement, but there's definitely also areas where we can actually close out stuff that doesn't bring value to the patient, not value to the business.
Okay, thank you very much. I wonder if you would like to spend each of you a few sentences to close this discussion and maybe reiterate what you think are the main and most important points for keeping patient safety in the industry.
No, I think, okay. So I think, every time I sit in a conference like that, which is outside my comfort zone, I learn a lot. And I think the fact that, and I mentioned it, digital era and the way people communicate and interact, I think question is not whether patient safety will remain the priority and focus. It is going to be. Question is, how do you ensure you take advantage of that priority, change your organizations and put structures and measurements in place to really bring yourself in the forefront of business. Rather than what it has been, I think traditionally always you have been a very, very important function, but you yourself are saying it's seen as a back-end function and people are asking why am I going to spend more and so on. So I think I will just flip the question and say the fact that patient safety is becoming more and more increasingly important in the context of the whole healthcare ecosystem, how can you take advantage and change yourself to become a very business-focused and business-critical organization?
Just to add to that, for me, 4 key points I tend to look at from an affiliate level. I look at my unit, my team, to make sure they have the passion. I look at how we can move that up to a bigger company level to make sure we add value, we add it PV. to the commercial strategy of the company. We then also link in close with our regulators. We see this as a collaborative approach. The regulators and pharma companies do have the same agenda in terms of patient safety. And finally, we have to include patients in everything we do. So those are the 4 key areas that we tend to focus to make sure safety stays as an industry priority.
Thank you. I would like to state that the glass is half full. I believe that GVP is a blessing. It is as if the regulators really thought about what is important and put it down in modules, and then for the industry to actually use it as guidance as to, how do we do this. So I believe the time has never been better to be dealing with patient safety, with patients' benefit risk, thanks to GVP.
I can only endorse what's been said by the rest of the panel. I would add that I would put the patient first, because I think good medicine is good business if done appropriately, and you will get good business if you have good medicine first. Operational excellence actually deals with many things. We heard just in 5 minutes 3 examples where you can actually improve operational excellence and take work out of the system. And one needs to keep your focus on this. It often gets put behind the big ideas and the organizational restructuring, but operational excellence is still the basis of pharmacovigilance, and then the cultural impact of how we've moved ourselves into the foreground needs to be maintained.
One last word.
Last word.
Being in clinical quality assurance, having worked for the regulators, having worked for industry, having worked in medical information closely with marketing, the question here is that what can industry do to keep patient safety as a priority? Maybe I'm considered by some as the policeman on the inside, but that's not really how I see myself. But I tell you one thing, the amount of effort we talk about added requirements by the regulators on us for PV. Look at how much the industry spends on other activities. Many of you would have heard of MRPs, market research programs, patient support programs, all of this which we are spending lots of money on admin work. When you look at the data collected, which could be intelligent data, but unfortunately it's not so, why aren't we collecting patient safety data, real scientific data, and feed it back into publications to learn more and add value to what we are doing? That's where I would see where we could do more.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.